Hey family, Daniel here and welcome back to Whole True Apologetics, where we seek answers to tough questions. These last few weeks we've been dealing with and wrestling with this single question of who is God. And the reason we're dealing with this question is because we began to understand that how we define and understand God is vitally important. Because if we understand or define God incorrectly, that directly affects every aspect of our lives. For example, I've given this before, if we believe God is distant or uncaring, then we're going to live as though God doesn't care when we go through our times. We are not going to turn to Him when we go through our times, because that obviously our belief in God is directly affecting how we live. If you're someone who believes God does not exist, then that is directly going to affect how you live your day-to-day life, your view of purpose, your view of life, your view of everything. So we got to set this foundation. That's why we've been doing this, of who is God, and have a right understanding of who God is, so in which we can build our lives correctly. And so we've been looking at Scripture and seeing what does it say about who God is. And we've seen some attributes of God. All right, we've looked at the fact that God is holy. We looked at the fact that God is eternal. Now today, I'm going to do something a little different. We're going to pause for a second, and I want to deal with one very common question that is brought up when you begin to talk about God. Very, very common question. And maybe it's come up with you. Maybe you've had a conversation with someone, you're like, well, I believe God created the universe. And then a common question that comes up after is, well, if you believe God created the universe, then who made God? And often when that's stated, people think they got you. They kind of got you trapped in a corner. This is like the best questions ever made, and now you can't answer it. Well, we're going to look at this question, see how this question actually is a faulty question and falls apart when you begin to look at it more detailed. But this question is tied into an argument of God, all right? Argument for God. And let me just lay out this argument for God. I'm not going to go into detail. I've done that in the previous video. The argument for God is called the Cosmological Argument, all right? And it basically goes like this. Everything that began to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause. It's a simple argument stating that everything began to exist. For example, you have a chair you're sitting on. Well, that chair is not eternal. It began to exist. Something caused it, all right? And then it says, well, the universe began to exist. We see that from science. We see that from philosophy. It's not eternal. Therefore, something outside the universe had to cause the universe to exist. That's the basic argument, all right? And then what often follows is like, okay. Well, then what caused God? What caused God? Well, this question again falls apart when you look at it a little bit more. As we saw from last week, we looked at the fact that God is eternal. What does that mean? By definition, God is uncreated or uncaused. That is by definition. And so stating that God, what created God, is kind of a nonsense statement, because the definition of God is the fact that He's eternal and uncaused or uncreated. And people such as J.P. Moreland and many others have stated this question of who caused God, who created God, creates what's called a category fallacy. And what they simply mean by this is there's a mixing of categories that don't go together. And he gives an example of stating, it's a question like this. So say someone asks you, what does the color red smell like? Or how much does a musical note weigh? Well, those questions, if I ask those to you, you'd be like, that's kind of a nonsense question. Why is that a nonsense question? It's a nonsense question because it's mixing two categories. Color and smell are different categories. So that's why that question doesn't make any sense. Weight and musical note are different categories. That's why that question doesn't make any sense. So when you're asking what caused God, you're mixing two categories. You're asking what caused something that is uncaused. And that's why it's a nonsense question. And so really the basic premise or basic statement of the question is what caused an uncreated creator of the universe, which doesn't make any sense as a question. So is it logical to believe in an uncaused God? Yes, because by the very definition, God has to be uncaused. Because if God is created, well then what created God? And then you're stuck in this endless cycle of what created God, what created this, and you're in this cycle, and it's just this nonsense, mindless, endless cycle that has no answers and doesn't make a lot of sense. There has to be a beginning. There has to be a beginninger, an uncaused creator, something that began everything. And the second thing I want to note why it is logical to believe in an uncaused God is because even critics today will say the universe has a beginning. Something had to begin the universe, all right? And we know the universe is not eternal. We know the universe can't create itself, like pull itself up by its own bootstraps. It can't do that. All right, we see that from science and philosophy. So therefore, what caused the universe has to be something that's outside of the universe. And what is that something? That something has to be timeless, spaceless, powerful, and it has to be uncaused. And by that very definition, that is God. And so again, is it logical to believe that God is uncaused? Yes, because by definition, God is eternal and uncaused. And so the question, who made God, creates a category fallacy and is a nonsense question. And I want to point to one verse. This is in Psalm 90, verse 2. It states this. It says, before the mountains were born, before you gave birth to the earth and the world, from eternity to eternity, you are God. You are God. So, how do we answer the question, who made God? Well, by definition, God is uncaused. And it's logical that God has to be uncaused, uncreated, to be God. Well, I hope that helps, and I will see you guys next week. Hey, if you like this video, I want to encourage you to like, subscribe, and share this channel, as well as check out the other videos on this channel.